Hi, the internet. It's me, Ben. I'm a former Catholic school principal, former Catholic youth minister, former Catholic school teacher, former Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore. I got rid of that. I've got a long catalog of videos chronicling how I left Catholicism. It's called Donald Trump Made Me an Atheist. You can click here to get to it. But for now, actually, this video is for patrons only. I'm working on securing a job and I'm trying to lay low a little bit, and I don't want to drive my algorithm any further to increase my reach, so I'm just waiting for now. We'll get there. Anyway, so every once in a while I post Patreon-only videos. They stay behind a paywall for a little bit. So I don't know. I don't know when you're going to see this video. You might be on the Patreon side of it. You might be here after I put the video public. I don't know. You could be a patron. Just go to patreon.com/BigBennyBuckets. A big thank you to my newest patrons, Jackie and Garrett. Look, did that at the top. I did that at the top of the episode. Bizarre. Okay, but today, this is another episode of Crazy Catholic Concepts. This is an intermittent series that I do in which I cover the uniquely weird teachings and practices that are exclusively or predominantly utilized in Catholicism. Now, when I started this series, I wasn't sure if I would have enough material. It's like, would I be able to do this with enough frequency to justify spending 10 minutes on an opening segment? And you know what? It turns out that it is. There's lots to do. Catholicism turns out to be the strega nona of bizarreness, a magically infinite supply of post hoc rationalizations and superficial justifications. Oh, you don't know strega nona? Strega nona is the shit. Strega nona is a children's book about an Italian grandmother who manifests pasta into existence using a magical cauldron and a spell, only to have some rube named Big Anthony fuck the whole thing up. Big Anthony doesn't pay attention to the fact that there's also a spell to turn off the magical cauldron. So pasta begins self-replicating and fills up the entire house, and eventually the entire town is covered in fettuccine. It's like if Olive Garden was offering free and unlimited soup, salad, breadsticks, and pasta. The difference here, though, and you can see on the screen, is that pasta from strega nona looks edible. So there are differences. So what are we covering today? Well, we're going to get into some of the teachings on Mary, the mother of Jesus. I was tempted to make a very saucy and very funny joke about, like, there's something about Mary, but don't worry, literally every single Catholic blog or YouTube channel or hip teen site has done that joke already. They beat me to the punch on this very, very clever joke about a movie that features a character named Mary with her hair in a way that they would never envisage the Mother of Mary acting. There's definitely a layer of irony to the fact that they make a pun or that they make a riff on that movie. There are three big claims about Mary that are sort of unique to Catholicism. I'm going to cover the first two today. Actually, I was going to cover all three. This is me now recording after having done all the research for this video. It took me forever to get through the first two, and I just thought, well, you can see by the length of this video, this is not a short one. Like, I'm not going to be able to get through all three. I'm going to wait on the assumption for another day. If I'm being honest, the second claim, it wore me out. It made me feel gross, so I stopped. I don't feel bad about that. Each of these three claims are positively bonkers. They make no sense. They barely fit into the Catholic cinematic universe of theology, and they certainly don't have any evidence in their favor, any real evidence anyway. The evidence is scant at best. The claims exist purely to solve problems. They are post hoc rationalizations in themselves, but then those post hoc rationalizations require more post hoc rationalizations. So here they are. Here are the two we're going to cover. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was born without original sin and never sinned in her entire life. So that's one. The second one is Mary conceived Jesus without any sexual act occurring, remained a virgin throughout Jesus' pregnancy, Jesus' birth, and Jesus' entire life, and Mary's entire life, that she never engaged in any sexual act. Right? Let's take the first one. Mary was born without original sin. Mary was conceived by her parents through an act of sexual intercourse, although it's not actually mentioned in any of the Catholic blogs. They're so funny with how silly they are. They're going to spend so much time talking about sex, but they just say, like, they'll all say, like, Mary was conceived in the usual way, meaning, but they won't say it. They just have to They have to imply it heavily. The doctrine of the Immaculate Conception states that while all humans are born inheriting original sin from Adam, Mary was not. So Mary didn't inherit original sin. She was exempt from original sin. And that leads to just so many questions. The first of which is, what position did Mary's parents, Elizabeth and Joachim, what did they use to conceive someone without original sin? And are we going to call it the divine loophole from now on? Because that's what I nominate. But really, though, the first question is, like, who deserves the credit for this? Like, was it them? Like, was it Mary's parents? Did they do something special to make Mary born without original sin? Or was it Mary? Was there something about Mary's character? Look, see, I just stepped in it. I did the something about Mary bit without even realizing it. Was there something in Mary's character before her conception that led to her being conceived without original sin? Or was it God? Was this God's plan? God ordained this birth somehow to be originally sinless. The Catechism is really clear that all humans are born with this inherited original sin from Adam and then actually in real life commit real sins. All of us do. The Catechism is also really clear that Mary is human. Like, she's not God. She's an actual just human. So how do they square this circle? All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. All humans are born with original sin. Mary is a human. Mary is born without original sin. I mean, it's not definitional anymore. But anyway, and the answer is Mary is born this way. The answer is that God uniquely blessed this conception in such a way that its fruits, the person of Mary, is born without original sin. And that's miraculous, right? It's a miracle that God performs to make this person born without original sin. And why? Like, why should we believe that? And why is that important? And well, that gets hazy. A frequent apologetic when people get boxed in is that, well, like, Mary was the first tabernacle, right? Mary first housed Jesus, and wouldn't we want for Mary to be that sort of perfect container for Jesus? An imperfect, a stained container can't house something spotless because its sin will rub off on that which it contains, which, there's just a recursion problem there at that point because, well, okay, if a stained thing can't hold a stainless thing, then Mary's mother would also need to be sinless. And then we'd have this sinless turtles all the way down situation. So the Catholic pivot is that not that it was required, right? It isn't that Jesus definitionally couldn't exist within the womb of a person who was sinful. It's just that it was merely proper, right? Like, wouldn't it be fitting for Jesus to be born within the womb of a sinless person? It's not necessary. Jesus doesn't need to be born this way. It doesn't need to be born of a sinless virgin. It's just that's how God would do it, right? It's like a reverse engineering problem. Like, well, how would you bring a perfect demigod into the world? Would you do it through some seedy woman who was constantly trying to, screw people over? Would that be how God would manifest his presence into the world? And so you go, okay, yeah, I guess that sort of makes sense, but it doesn't, because the number of times that God uses imperfect people to bring about his will, like, it would be way more consistent with the Bible if it was, in fact, a woman who was very sinful who brought Jesus into the world. But that's whatever. Point is, though, is that it is possible for Jesus to have been born of a sinful woman, but that wasn't God's plan. That's not what God wanted. Well, if that's the case, then why insist that it must be the case? Why must we believe that Mary was without sin? If it's merely proper, right? If it's merely like, well, it seems like God would do it this way. Why insist on it so harshly? I mean, this is one of those things that Catholics really beat into people is the sinless nature of Mary. Why do that if we don't like have evidence for it, or if it isn't a logical necessity? But most importantly are the implications about original sin, both specifically for Mary, but then also generally for all humans. Mary in Catholicism is honored among humans and even among the saints as this sort of paragon of morality. But for what? She was born without original sin. She was born without the natural inclination to be sinful. And she didn't do that. God blessed her with that. So why are we honoring Mary for something that seems she didn't do. Moreover, and this is the bigger one, right? If God is capable of, at any moment, imbuing a conception without original sin, knowing that the product of such a conception would be less inclined to or even immune from sin, why doesn't God do that all the time? If Mary still had free will, and Catholics insist that she did, because they view Mary's assent to pregnancy with Jesus as the pinnacle of spiritual obedience, well, then that means a human can be born without original sin and contain free will, can exercise free will. Well, and that means that God could make a better world right now by simply banishing original sin. God could make every conception without original sin. Each person then would be born less inclined or possibly immune to sin and still have free will, and there'd be less suffering. God is being intentionally capricious in this version of Catholicism, and they don't recognize it. It's so goofy. We know he can, and we know he has. He's just being willingly obstinate and not reworking his original sin policy, right? Like, all he had to do was look. I was like, wow, shit, Mary, she's delivering over here. I made her without original sin, and she is just absolutely crushing it. Maybe I do that with more people. Nah, don't wanna. God's a dick. Let's go to number 2. Mary was a perpetual virgin, never engaging in a sexual act before, during, or after Jesus' birth. It's my favorite of Catholic goofy teachings. And then it gets gross. I tweeted about this while I was researching for this video. This is the grossest thing. You know, the Catholic Church got caught in a pedophilia ring, and that's gross and bad. And I have actually a relatively close personal connection to it, so I'm not diminishing the experience of victims. But I'm going to say that the Catholic Church's role as a host of a pedophilia ring springs forth from ideas like Mary's perpetual virginity. And if you think that sounds hyperbolic, buckle up. That Mary needed to never have had sex in order to conceive Jesus makes sense to me from a legend building perspective. If I'm building out a character who is to be both man and God, I would say, absolutely, let's start it from the top, right at the very beginning, at the conception. Let's perform a miracle and imbue this entire human's life from conception to death as divinely ordained. I'm with that. I don't think it happened. I don't think it happened, but it makes sense. However, why Mary needed to remain a virgin is seemingly unfounded. It's not evidenced, and it seems like it would be a bummer for both Mary and Joseph, unless Joseph was like a really unsatisfactory lover. Catholic Answers makes a run at addressing this question, but they fall down even more regularly than Jesus on his way up to Calvary. That's an irreverent joke. They start by making a reference to the Proto-Evangelium of James, or the early Gospel of James, which they claim, and I'm going to quote them because I don't want to be wrong, so I'm going to read, an important historical document which supports the teaching of Mary's perpetual virginity, written probably less than 60 years after the conclusion of Mary's earthly life around AD 120, when memories of her life were still vivid in the minds of many. And that's written in such a way that they think you should take that seriously. Unpack that for a minute. Let's unpack that. They say written in 120. Other sources say 150. But let's give them 120. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, even though they haven't earned it. So this account is supposedly written when memories of her life were still vivid in the minds of people who literally met her and knew her. The Proto-Evangelium of James is written in the year 120, 135 years after Mary's born. And since the Proto-Evangelium of James covers Mary's birth, it means that while the memories of Mary are still vivid in the minds of those who knew her, well, no, not really, right? The minds of those who knew her, let's take 80 years old, right? Let's say Mary's 80. So if Mary's 80, she's born in the year 15 BCE, then that's the year 65 AD when she's gone, when she's no longer with us. Let's say just before she dies, she's assumed into heaven, just before she moves on from this life. Let's say it's the year 65 AD. She has to be talking to someone about her sex life for some reason. Why she would be doing that, I don't know. And she's got to be talking to someone about her sex life, to someone who's going to remember this conversation. So let's put that person at the year. They're 15 years old. Okay. So they're 15, meaning that they were born in the year 50, right? A very old Mary is talking to a 15-year-old about her own sex life and how she never had sex with anyone. So it's the year 120 that's written down. So then this person is now 70 years old, and they're like, I remember Mary telling me about her sex life. Let me write that down. That's the most generous I can be. This is the best I can do for them. A 70-year-old person wrote down a 55-year-old memory of Mary's firsthand account of her own sex life. That's not good evidence. That's not good evidence at all. The Proto-Evangelium of James itself is a short, non-canonical text about Mary, almost exclusively. It's about Mary's life, her conception, her early childhood, and then the nativity of Jesus. And that's about it. It's interesting because Catholic Answers does not post a link to the text of the Proto-Evangelium of James, which is weird because it's really easily findable. I linked it in the description, but it wasn't serious Google sleuthing that got me to that site. I just typed in Proto-Evangelium of James and found it. So I thought, well, why, there's links all over this Catholic Answers page. Why don't they link to the Proto-Evangelium of James? And then the reasons, I think, are twofold for why they didn't do that. First, this book is non-canonical for a reason. The events are very clearly legendary. Mary, maybe turns into a dove at some point. Joseph agrees to be betrothed to Mary through, this drawing of lots. And in so doing, a dove shoots out of the stick and says, oh, Joseph, he's the guy. And he's really old, so he's embarrassed. He's like, I don't want to marry this teenager. I'm old. But even still, it doesn't explicitly state that Mary and Joseph refrain from sexual relations after the birth of Jesus, right? It actually just has Mary taking this role of a temple maiden, when these temple maiden characters are virgins and are celibate for life. So then Mary becomes pregnant, but they're already breaking norms of a temple maiden anyway because she's getting married. So why? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. The second reason Catholic Answers doesn't link to this story is because it is so bad. I mean, it is badly written. Every sentence begins with the word and. Look at it. I'll put it here. It's a bunch of run-on sentences with little to no cohesive narrative arc. It reads a lot like North Korean propaganda about Kim Jong-un. It's just bad. So that's the Catholic Answers version. They go to a non-canonical fever dream of James. Let's go to this one. This is an article saying that we know Mary was a virgin after Jesus was born because the Gospels don't say she wasn't. This author spends all of their time responding to references in the Gospels to Jesus' siblings and then going through the Greek terminology and the Aramaic of why it's more likely that those words didn't necessarily mean that these were Jesus' full siblings. These could have been cousins or Joseph's kids from a previous marriage, that they would have used the same word. And to me, and hopefully to anyone else, that doesn't tell us anything about whether Mary had sex. Why would it? So at their best, those two articles tell us why we should possibly entertain the notion that Mary didn't have sex after she had Jesus, but none of them explain why we should care. Why does it matter what Mary did with her genitals after the birth of Jesus? They don't cover it. If you read this, I'll link the article. It's terrifying. It explains that the belief about Mary is that she was a virgin before, during, and after Jesus' birth. And it always uses that language, this before, during, and after Jesus' birth. And for a moment, I thought, well, that makes sense, right? The birth of Jesus was a BFD in terms of the life of Mary. So it makes sense to use it as a temporal delineator of what happened in Mary's life. I mean, we even do that with the Gregorian calendar, right? Before and after Christ. But then I started reading what they meant, and it is not great. It's not great. Here's what it means. This article seems to be describing the church fathers struggling to determine how Mary remained a virgin through the act of giving birth to Jesus. In their minds, that act would entail the revocation of virginity. And I thought, well, that's really bizarre. Because I guess to these church fathers, having anything pass through the vaginal canal would be an act of defilement, I guess. It was just gross in its own right. So they make up these post hoc explanations of what happened. One of them supposed that, well, maybe Jesus just magicked out of Mary. There was not even labor. Just the way he would 33 years later when he would yeet himself out of the tomb. Did I use it right, kids? Did I use yeet correctly? And as I was going through this, as I was trying to figure out why they were making up all these things about whether or not Jesus like actually passed through Mary, whether she went through labor or not. And I was talking with my wife about this I was like, this is really weird. She goes, they're talking about her hymen. And I went, what? She said, yeah, they're talking about her hymen. They think that if Jesus was divinely impregnated in Mary, then that doesn't tear her hymen. And if she's going to remain a virgin through the act of giving birth to Jesus, Jesus would have to exit her without tearing her hymen. This is a long discussion about whether or not Mary's hymen broke when Jesus was born. And holy shit if she wasn't right. I couldn't figure it out because they were kind of being delicate in their language. And maybe I was just reading too quickly, but this is definitely what they mean. Virginity to these people is tied up in whether or not Mary's hymen was intact. If Mary gives birth to Jesus the normal way, her hymen will rupture and that will revoke her virginity. And that's exactly what it is. To them, a virgin giving birth required 2 miracles. First is how the child gets there in the first place. There has to be some way, some mechanism for the virgin to become pregnant without rupturing her hymen. And then the child has to get out without rupturing her hymen. Otherwise, she's not a virgin anymore. Here it fucking is. Here it is. I'll read it. Holy Mary, ever virgin and immaculate, is Mother of God, since in this latter age she conceived in true reality without human seed from the Holy Spirit, God the Word himself, who before the ages was begotten of God the Father, and gave birth to him without injury, her virginity remaining equally inviolate after the birth. Without injury. That's what that means. Now, while that last bit was from the First Lateran Council, the idea that Jesus poofed out of Mary is not like church teaching. The church doesn't insist that you believe that. You actually can believe that possibility. You can accept that Mary did not birth Jesus and still be a Catholic in good standing. And that unfounded assertion is yet another post hoc rationalization in itself, because it's used as an explanation for why Mary, born without original sin, could give birth. Because labor pains were supposed to be punishment from the Garden of Eden, right? God says to Adam and Eve that women will have pain in childbirth because of what Eve has done. And since Mary doesn't have original sin, she needs a way to give birth to Jesus without having any pain. So, well, what if she doesn't have labor? What if she just, poof, I got me a Jesus. Here he is. Okay, reality check here. I had a technical difficulty in the middle of that last recording. And then we hit a heat wave and I'm up upstairs. I've never recorded in the middle of summer. And now here we are, it's like 90 degrees and I have time to get this done. It's really fucking hot. I ditched the shirt and tie. I know I don't look professional anymore. It's not a clean look. I only ever wore the shirt and tie because my wife thinks I look good that way. I look a little schlubby. I mean, I can see it. I'm looking at, it's not good. I mean, it's a nice color. It blends in with the gray too much. Anyway, we're going to have to just continue rolling because I can't put this off any longer. It's absurd. But it's too damn hot for a shirt and tie. You'd see evidence of the temperature in the room, and I don't think anyone's here for that. I found an article where a good Catholic person was arguing that someone's virginity should not be tied to the state of their hymen, especially post-childbirth. In reference to Aquinas, they said the following: I still don't get why they view a birth passing through the birth canal as a violation of virginity. It must be an old medical misconception of some kind. I scoured the internet for this person's name, but they remain, alas, uncredited. I have a strong fucking notion that this is a man, though. And that's going to be evidenced by the thing that they say next about childbirth. Oh, also, now we're in peak cicada season, and these fuckers are so loud. I don't think it shows up. I did an audio test. I don't think they show up. It's really loud. They would make the following claim in reference to whether or not Mary experienced pain during childbirth. Actually, pain in childbirth is not universally experienced today. Some women have babies with little or no pain, quick and painless labors. It's very possible that Mary could have given birth naturally without pain, similar to many modern women, especially those who practice natural birthing. while there is a certain segment of the female population, here I'm thinking of a kombucha drinking, granola eating, anti-vax type woman who might say something this stupid, that type of woman also wouldn't spend any of her time discussing whether a magic baby tore Mary's hymen and ruined her virginity. So this was definitely written by a man who is out of his fucking depth. Don't get me wrong, there does exist anecdotal data of women who had natural childbirths and report experiencing little to no pain. All that data, though, is anecdotal at best. And so if you're a man who's opining about what a specific woman felt, I don't think you should comment. I think you should just shut the fuck up. That's what I think. Sometimes men just need to shut the fuck up. All this is off topic. This is a tangent because none of this addresses why we should care. Why does it matter to the faithful about whether Mary was a virgin after Jesus' birth or during Jesus' birth? I don't know. Why does the church care? Why would they care about Mary's virginity after the birth of Jesus? Why is it relevant to our lives? So this is the best I've got here. And it suggests, if I was going to distill this down, it suggests that Mary, being born without original sin and being the pinnacle of obedience to God, sacrifices her sexuality and her sex life as a way of consecrating her life to God. Virginity entails self-denial and, in some mysterious way, new life in God. It's a kind of sacrifice, and contrary to modern notions, it's the sacrifice of something supremely good, not of something dirty. As David said, he would not offer burnt offerings which cost me nothing. The entire principle of sacrifice rests upon the reality that something really good, not a piece of trash, is being offered to God. Whoever offers the sacrifice recognizes that God is the author of the very gift being offered back to him, a gift that is, like the offerer himself, next to nothing in comparison to God. Our Father receives such gifts gladly and pours out on the worshiper abundances of grace and glory absurdly beyond the value of the sacrifice. And so, says St. Paul, we go from glory to glory. So did Mary never eat dessert either? Wouldn't that act of self-denial be a truly beautiful sacrifice to God? I mean, it's something good that we're sacrificing back. Doesn't that also mean that married couples today, like right now, would be better off, would better serve the Lord by abstaining from sex completely? I mean, as long as they're both willingly doing that. Couldn't a couple who wanted to really dedicate their lives to God, as a team, as a married couple, decide, we're not going to have sex anymore. We're going to offer that part of ourselves to God. We're going to consecrate our sex lives to God. No, the church wouldn't say that. Anyway, that's actually a smaller point relative to my larger one, which is that this is a perversion of giving and receiving. Let's talk about this. Imagine spending a decent amount of time or energy or money on a gift that you want for someone else. Like, you really are excited to give them this gift. You've put a lot into it, right? Like, it was something really thoughtful, and they unwrapped it, and you could see as soon as they realized what this gift was, like, tears start welling up in their eyes. You can immediately see how special and significant this gift is. Like, you nailed it, right? And they finish unwrapping it, and they say, I love it. It's amazing, but I want you to have it. You'd be so off-put by that. That would be so bothersome to you, wouldn't it? And the good Catholic might retort, that's because you put your own investment into it. You put your time and energy and money into it. You're saying that you'd be hurt because they didn't appreciate the sacrifice you made. God can't be hurt in that same way. You can't detract from God in this way. God gives gifts without diminishing himself, so someone choosing to give the gift back wouldn't hurt God's feelings. And to that I say, no, you're missing my point. What I'm saying is that when you give someone a gift, it's because you're trying to make their lives better in some way, whether it's in a practical sense, in an emotional sense. You think that their lives would be at least incrementally improved by the receipt of this gift. And then they take it and say, no, you have it. The reality is that this gift maybe wouldn't have the same significance for me. Maybe it's an homage to a deceased relative. It means nothing to me. I don't get anything from having it. That would be the better comp here, right? I don't get anything from it. And this person goes, I love this gift. It's amazing. Here, I'm giving it back to you. That isn't good. That isn't good giving and receiving. Like, even if you believed they were just overwhelmed by the generosity of the gift, wouldn't their giving it back not do anything for you? It wouldn't be good for you. As the giver of that gift, I would be just altogether puzzled because I gave you the thing because I thought it would make your life better. And you're just handing it back. I don't understand. Why are you doing that? Like, the recipient is recognizing that the gift is a good gift. The recipient is recognizing that it is meaningful, and the recipient is giving it back to someone for whom it carries no meaning. I would just be confused as the giver of that gift. I wouldn't be hurt. Well, maybe I would be hurt. That's not the point. I would be confused, and there would be no meaning in that person giving the gift back. It doesn't mean the same thing because I can't do anything with it. And now you can't do anything with it, but I got it for you to use or look at or whatever. This article goes on to say, the relationship between marital sex and virginity is not bad good, but good better. And that is some toxic bullshit right there. Because in the Catholic reckoning, you are called by God to your specific vocation. If what this article is saying is that if I'm called to marriage, that's the vocation to which I'm called. It's a vocation that is good but not great. That feels mean. But then you say, but it's still good. The marriage vocation is still good. But God called me to my specific vocation based on gifts and talents that he gave me. So God made me in such a way that he wanted me to be married, but that's only good. Imagine you are looking to get a job at a company, and there's two jobs available, an accountant and a salesman, right? And the hiring manager gives you some material about their sales practices, right? It's a bunch of information about the tactics they use, how they work, some of their sales figures. And you study up on that material in preparation for an interview. And so then you interview and they start asking you questions and you really nail all the sales stuff. You kind of incorporate what they shared with you, but then also bring your own spin to the table. And they ask you a couple of questions about accounting, and you can you pick your way through it, but it's not, you don't blow anyone away, but it's just like you answered the questions, more or less. And during the interview, the employer goes, wow, you seem like you'd be a great fit for our sales team, which is good. It's a good job. It's not a great job. It's not great. That's accounting, right? Accounting is great. You didn't really hit on any of our accounting procedures and sort of talk about what you knew about that. And you talked so much about the sales tactics, and that was good, right? It was good. You had good information about sales, and so that's why we're going to put you in that sales position. It's a good job, not a great job, but it's good. It's a good job. It's fine. It's kind of a shame you didn't. It would have been better, it would have been better if you had been more ready to answer questions about accounting. But it's a good job. You'll like it. Yeah. And you say, well, wait, like, I could answer questions about accounting. I could talk to you more about your accounting strategies and techniques. I don't know. You didn't really have that information ready for us. We asked the questions, you just weren't really aware, right? The reason this is a good comp is because in Catholic theology, God calls you to your specific vocation. God calls you to priesthood or married life based on gifts that God gave you, strengths and weaknesses that God gave you. What a dipshit, what a shitty thing to do. That's a shitty thing. The church's official position is that consensual, heterosexual, unprotected vaginal intercourse between two married partners, that is a lot of caveats, is always not just morally acceptable, but actually a good thing. Married couples participating in sexual acts is a good thing. That's what they say on the record. In fact, they'll say it's the ultimate expression of human love. Highest form of routinely practiced love between two human beings is heterosexual sex in a married relationship. First of all, a lot of those caveats very carefully exclude a big chunk of normal human sexuality, and I would argue aren't necessary to the broader picture, except the consent part. You need the consent, otherwise it's assault. While I'm only going to be addressing the second part of this, I see you. If you didn't fit into that original set, I see you, and you're right. But that's not what this video is about. I've got other videos on that stuff. Let's just stick in the heteronormative lens of the Catholic Church. If you listen to what some of the things that St. John... I almost called him St. John Paul II. God, that guy's an asshole. But let's just look at it from the very heteronormative lens of the Catholic Church. They say that sex between a married couple is a good thing. It's a morally good thing. And then if you couple that with some of the things Pope John Paul II has said about a man's duty to bring his wife to orgasm in the sex act, you could get the impression that the Catholic Church has a somewhat sex-positive view. You'd be wrong, because it's all mired in this sort of gross patriarchal bullshit. And let's get to that. Let's take that aforementioned plea that men be attentive lovers. Here's John Paul II. If a woman does not obtain natural gratification from the sexual act, there is a danger that her experience of it will be qualitatively inferior, will not involve her fully as a person. I would say that I mostly agree with that. That's a pretty good notion right there. The problem is what immediately precedes what he says there, because I would actually make that claim about anyone. I would say, anyone should make sure their partner is thoroughly enjoying themselves to whatever extent that is possible. And then I would also say that heterosexual cis men need a particular reminder of this thought. But I would say that's because of a culture in Western civilization that treats women's sexual pleasure as auxiliary at best and unnecessary by default. But John Paul II states it this way. He says, "It must be taken into account that it is naturally difficult for the woman to adapt herself to the man in the sexual relationship, that there is a natural unevenness of the physical and psychological rhythms, so that there is a need for harmonization, which is impossible without goodwill, especially on the part of the man, who must carefully observe the reactions of the woman." I find this problematic because it really leans into male-centric attitudes of sexuality. By saying that the woman has difficulty adapting to the man, you've just normalized the sexual experience, right? The man's rhythms are normal and women must adapt to that, or men must allow for women to adapt to that. You've just taken female sexual pleasure and turned it into baggage that has to be dragged along with the normal experience of the man. And the man should be careful to bring his partner's pleasure along with him. That's not how we should treat each other. In spite of attempting to spin sexuality as an inherently good thing, in spite of what appears to be superficially a cheery attitude towards female sexual pleasure, the church doesn't believe that sex is a good thing inherently. They can't. It's logically incoherent. Why do you believe Mary and Joseph didn't have sex after Jesus was born? Is there any evidence? No, there isn't. There's no positive evidence, just reasonable rebuttals to claims that Mary's other children that were mentioned weren't her biological children. That's not evidence that they didn't have sex. It's evidence that she didn't have children. To twist that into evidence that she didn't have sex is ludicrous, right? I mean, I don't have to get into that. That's ludicrous. Maybe she was infertile. Wouldn't that that would be a better miracle anyway. For God to impregnate a barren virgin, that would be a pretty impressive miracle right there. Anyway, since there's no positive evidence to believe that Mary was a perpetual virgin, the only way we would need to accept it is if it followed logically from another set of beliefs, right? And that would be that celibacy is an inherently higher order expression of human sexuality, and Mary is considered the epitome of exclusively human behavior and obedience. If you take those two facts, that Mary is the most holy human being in existence, and that human sexuality's best expression is celibacy, that's the only way you get there. From those two immutable facts, we can derive that Mary must have never had sex. And if logical deduction can tell us what Mary did with her genitals through the course of her entire lifetime, it can also tell us that if Mary did have sex, it would mean she wasn't as great. If Mary had engaged in sexuality with her husband, to whom she was married, she would not have been as holy. Market this however you want, but at the end of the day, what you're saying is that expressing sexuality with your married partner sullies yourself. It makes you less holy. If Mary's ultimate holiness was embodied in her celibacy, then anyone not engaging in celibacy is marring their holiness. And while Catholics would never say that out loud, it's an unavoidable logical conclusion to other beliefs that they hold. Can something inherently good make someone less holy? I can't imagine how that would be the case. So sexual activity, even from married couples, even without contraception, is not good. Here's Pope Pius XII. This doctrine of the excellence of virginity and of celibacy and of their superiority over the married state was, as we have already said, revealed by our divine Redeemer and by the apostle of the Gentiles. So too, it was solemnly defined as a dogma of divine faith by the Holy Council of Trent and explained in the same way by all the Holy Fathers and the doctors of the Church. The Catholic Church cannot logically hold all these positions. That sex is inherently good and that Mary didn't have sex because she's inherently good. Look, this video took me a long time. I'm going to get into the last big Marian claim, which is that Mary was assumed into heaven. It's so dumb. They're so dumb. It's a dumb thing to believe. I guess I don't mean to call the people dumb. It's just like it makes no sense. Why would you believe this? We'll get to it. I'll get into it in the next video. I don't know how long that one will be because I'm still in the research phase of that video. Hey, some of you folks know me personally, and I think you knew that I was out of a job. I do have a lot of things coming down the pike. I can't officially announce anything right now, but please, if your finances are strapped in any way, I'm in a better place than I was when I started this project, and I just want to be transparent with my patrons. Hey, if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. It will help me out. Really, it does. Thanks for watching. I'm going to go take a cold shower because I'm sweating my ass off. Goodbye. I love you.